everyone! This is one of my favorite chapters, so I'm excited to go over to the skeletal system with you. Some objectives for this chapter are to look at the skeletal cartilages, which ties into the tissues we talked about in one of the earlier chapters, and then to classify bones, look at the function and structure of the bones, how they develop, how they repair themselves, and then what happens when things go wrong. So first of all, we have our skeletal cartilages. There's three different types. The first one is hyaline cartilage, and that's the most abundant. You'll see that throughout the entire skeleton. And then we have elastic cartilage, very similar to the elastic tissue in your ears and at the tip of your nose. And then this one's really cool, the fibrocartilage. It is really, really, really strong. So the places you'll find this include your disc between your spine, because as you are standing upright and moving around and walking and running, all of those bones are kind of smashing against each other, and without that firm pressure disc in between, it wouldn't be able to keep you moving throughout the day. Alright, if we look at the skeleton in this picture, we see two different types. One is the axial skeleton and one is the appendicular skeleton. And we need to figure out the difference. So the axial is including your skull, the vertebral column, otherwise known as your spine, and your rib cage. So everything that's kind of on the axis of your body is axial. And then we have the appendicular skeleton, which includes your appendages. Appendages meaning your upper and lower limbs, or arms and legs. If we look back at that picture, we can see the color-coded part, that dark orange. That's the axial part, right along the axis of your body, and everything else is appendicular. This picture also shows the different types of cartilages, so you can see where that's found in your body. Now, to classify the bones, we first classify them by shape. The most common is a long bone. It's the easiest to identify because it's longer than it is wide. It has one shaft and then two ends that look a little bit different. Then there's a short bone, that's anything that looks like a cube or a marble, a flat bone, which is very thin, and then an irregular bone, which doesn't really fit into any of the other classes. Here are some examples. So obviously the long bone is one of the easier ones to pick out. The flat bone, the example here is your sternum. Short bone, this one's showing your talus, which is one of your ankle bones. And then the irregular bone is your vertebra, which doesn't really fit into any category because it's so oddly shaped. The functions of all types of bones, no matter if it's long, short, irregular, or flat, is that it's there to support and protect your body. Without bone, the muscles would have nothing to connect to, so you would have no movement. One of the lesser known things about bones is that it actually stores minerals. So while your body is eating and absorbing nutrition from the things you eat, some of those minerals are actually stored inside your bones and can be used later when you most need them. And lastly on this slide, houses hematopoietic tissue in marrow. That really just means it's housing the place where the blood cells are being made. Alright, moving on to structure. There's interesting things about bones that don't really apply to other organ systems, and that's their bony markings. So each bone has different spots, either projections, meaning things that stick out, depressions, like little grooves, or openings that can all be found on page 151. I would encourage you to check that out. And these things kind of make the bones unique and identifiable. Then also, as far as structure goes, there's always a dense outer layer, and that's called the compact bone. And the inside is always made up of a spongy material called trabeculae. And it actually looks kind of like a sponge, and we'll see that right here. So this inside part right here, if we blow it up, it looks just like a sponge, and that's how your body gets blood into that bone and also some nerve tissue and other things like that. If your whole bone was made up of that dense outer cortex, the bone would be so heavy that you would not be able to move around. So that's why we have to have some space and some airiness on the inside. All right, so if we look at the short, flat, and irregular bones, the outside is a very thin plate of that compact bone, and on the inside you'll find the sponginess. If we look at a long bone, however, there's a little more complication here. So it still has that external periosteum, that's that hard cover surface, and it still has the same inside, the endosteum, that is more spongy, but it has other parts that are a little different than the other three types. One is the epiphyses. All right, epiphyses are the ends of the bone. So no matter what type of long bone there is, there's going to be one kind of like ball ending on each side, and then you'll find one long shaft in the middle, and that's filled with the yellow bone marrow. That's where a lot of the blood cells are being made. If we dive in a little bit more and we look at the very, very microscopic part of the bone, you'll see that there's little canals, and there's two different kinds. One is a haversian canal, and that's the kind that goes up and down. So it slides the lengthwise of a long bone. And then we have Volkmann's canals, which are going the opposite way. So they kind of connect like streets and avenues. And if you check out page 144, you'll find some more information on that. So now that we've covered the inside of the bone and what it's made up of, we need to talk about the major parts of the skeleton. So for this next part, we want to go over the major parts, being the biggest bones of the skeleton, describe their function, differentiate between axial versus appendicular, and then hopefully by the end of this chapter we should be able to identify some of the bigger bones and their markings. So let's start from the top down. With the skull, we have 22 cranial and facial bones. So just within your head, you have 22 different bones. All of these bones are joined together with joints that are called sutures. And a suture is really just kind of a sewing term. So if you're sewing something together, it fits really closely. That's where this name came from. And also within your skull, you have 85 different named passageways. That means there's 85 little tiny holes, or in some cases, one big hole, that allow for passage of blood vessels and nerves to get to places, and also some attachments for muscles. The big one that I put up here, this last named passageway, the foramen magnum, that one's important because it goes, it's at the bottom of your skull, and it allows the brainstem to come down and form your spinal cord. So definitely take a look at a picture of that one. If we separate the cranial and facial bones, these are four of the biggest cranial bones, meaning the part that's really up towards your brain. So the frontal bone is towards your forehead, parietal, two of those on each side. The occipital bone is found in the back, or the posterior side of your head, and that is named because the back of your head houses the part of your brain that has to do with your eyes, and occipital has to do with eyes. The temporal bones, one on each side, include the area right over under your ears. Three of the facial bones that you should be aware of are the mandible and maxilla. Mandible is the moving part of your jaw. Maxilla is the upper part of your jaw that contains your upper teeth. And then the zygomatic bones, definitely check those out in a picture. All right, moving down, still in the axial part of your skeleton, we have your vertebral column, or your spine. Notice all the different parts, and they're listed from top down. So at the very superior part, you have 7 cervical vertebrae. They make up your neck. Then we have 12 thoracic vertebrae. Those are connected to your rib cage. And then 5 lumbar make up your lower back. And then we end with the sacrum and the tiny little coccyx. You might remember seeing a coccyx on a spine, and it looks like the remnant of a tail. The easiest way to remember how many there are, I think, is to remember the times of day that you eat. So you eat breakfast at 7 a.m., you eat lunch at noon, and then supper around 5 p.m. So 7, 12, and 5 are the number of vertebrae. Your rib cage is made up of different types of ribs. There's true ribs, false ribs, and floating ribs. True are directly connected to your sternum. False ribs are connected to the sternum with a cartilage, and then floating ribs are the bottom ones that don't actually connect. They just kind of stick out towards the back and protect your kidneys. All right, moving out towards your shoulder. There's 3 bones that make up the shoulder joint: the clavicle, scapula, and humerus. Moving down your arm, we have the humerus, which is connected to the radius and ulna. And one question I would ask you to look into here is, what are some distinguishing characteristics of these long bones? So if I laid these 3 bones out on a table and they weren't connected to anything, how would you identify those? To finish up the upper limb, we have 8 carpals. Then we have metacarpals, which are the bones that make up your fist, and the phalanges, and those are your fingers. There's 3 types. I'm going to keep moving here. I'll give you plenty of time to look through this PowerPoint on your own. From the pelvic girdle, we have 3 bones that make up the coxal bones, or the coxae. They are the ischium, ilium, and pubis. The ischium is the top wing-like part. The ilium makes up the bottom part that we sit on, and the pubis wraps around towards the anterior side that forms the front of that hip area. The question I have for you here is, what is the difference between a male and female pelvis? If you look up the difference on Google, I think you'll find some interesting x-rays or pictures that show the difference, and really the main reason for a difference is childbearing. So keep that in mind when you research this question. The lower limb is composed of 3 long bones, called the femur, being your thigh bone, the tibia, and the fibula in your lower leg. The way I remember which is the fibula has an L in it, and that's on the lateral side of your leg. And again, I asked the same question about these bones. How would you tell the difference if they were not connected to a skeleton and just laid out in front of you? So make sure you check out the different bony landmarks to figure out that question. And to wrap up the skeleton, we have the 7 tarsals. Those are your ankle bones. And then metatarsals, which is very similar to the metacarpals we saw in the wrist. And the phalanges, meaning fingers. All right, I'm going to leave you at this point. There is a bunch of information at the end of this PowerPoint about joints, and I invite you to look through that on your own. You will be able to find this PowerPoint under the Lessons tab if you look into the PowerPoint folder. So make sure that you go over the skeleton and also the joints on your own, and also Chapter 7 for this week. So make sure that you're keeping up on this, and as always, if you have questions, let me know.